There are books that change the world, and then there are books that terrify it. Some were burned in public squares, others were hidden in tombs, or buried in desert caves for thousands of years, and a few are still banned to this day. But why? Why were these words so dangerous that kings, priests, and governments did everything they could to erase them? Today we're diving into 10 of the most banned, censored, and suppressed books in human history. Some ancient, some modern, and the stories of why they were feared. Because when a book is banned, it usually means someone is trying to hide something. The Communist Manifesto was published in 1848, right in the middle of a very turbulent era of industrialization and social unrest. It was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, two thinkers who believed the new industrial world was creating deep inequality. They saw factory owners, the capitalists, getting richer, while workers were stuck doing grueling labor for very little pay. In the book, Marx and Engels argue that all of human history is a story of class struggle, once fought between kings and peasants, now fought by capitalists and the working class. Their solution? Workers should unite, overthrow the capitalist system, and build a society where resources are shared more equally. Despite its radical message, the book did not fade into obscurity. In fact, it became a rallying cry for revolution. That same year, 1848, massive protests and uprisings erupted across Europe, many fueled by the very ideas of the manifesto. Over time, it spread far beyond Europe. Workers' movements around the world picked up its message, using it as a framework for fighting for better conditions, fair wages, and political representation. But not everyone welcomed this message. The ruling class saw this as a threat, not just to their wealth, but to the entire social order. In many countries, the book was quickly banned. Police raided homes searching for copies. Laws were passed to make sure it couldn't be read, published, or distributed. And the fear did not go away. During the Cold War, just owning the Communist Manifesto could land someone in serious trouble, especially in those countries that were actively trying to rule out anything seen as communist influence. It became more than a book. It became a symbol of rebellion. Today, the Communist Manifesto is no longer banned in most places, but its ideas still spark debate. Some argue that it holds ideas that are too dangerous, pointing to the way authoritarian regimes twisted its message. Others say that's missing the point. The Communist Manifesto wasn't a blueprint for dictatorship. It was a cry against injustice. So should this book be banned? I would say no. Ideas, even controversial ones, are meant to be challenged, not suppressed. As for the odds of it being banned again, in liberal democracies that's very unlikely. In other places, especially during times of social unrest, banning books like this is not really off the table. Whether you see it as a dangerous book or a visionary one, the Communist Manifesto forced the world to confront uncomfortable questions, ones we're still asking today. In 1988, acclaimed British Indian author Salman Rushdie published a novel called The Satanic Verses. Known for its literary talent and use of magical realism, Rushdie told a story that blended dreams, fantasy, and real-world figures, including elements inspired by the life of the Prophet Muhammad. But that creative approach came at a cost. Many Muslims around the world felt deeply offended. To them, the book was more than controversial. It was blasphemous. At first, Rushdie was celebrated as a bold and brilliant writer. The book received literary praise in the West for its style and ambition, but the backlash soon overshadowed any accolades. Protests erupted across the globe. In India, the book was banned outright. In countries like Pakistan and even the UK, demonstrations turned violent. Bookstores were attacked, and copies of the novel were burned. What began as a literary release soon spiraled into a global crisis. The outrage reached a terrifying peak when Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa in 1889, a religious decree calling for Salman Rushdie's execution. Suddenly, this wasn't just about banning a book. It became a matter of life and death. Rushdie was forced into hiding under constant police protection. The fatwa made him a target, and unfortunately, a lot of people that were involved with the book, publishers and booksellers, were regrettably attacked and even killed. The book was banned in several Muslim major countries, and fears spread across the publishing world. Today, the Satanic Verses remains banned in multiple countries. In others, it's available but controversial. Some argue that this book crosses the line into religious disrespect. Others defend it as a powerful symbol of freedom of expression and prove that literature must be free to challenge, provoke, and ask the uncomfortable questions. So, should it be banned? It depends on where you draw the line between harm and expression. The odds of it being unbanned in conservative religious states remain slim, but in much of the world, it stands as a fiercely defended and fiercely debated symbol of artistic freedom. The Satanic Verses shows just how far the power of the words can reach, not just to inspire or offend, but to reshape global conversations about speech, faith, and the cause of controversy. Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, was written by Adolf Hitler in the early 1920s while he was imprisoned following a failed coup attempt in Germany. In the book, Hitler laid out his political ideology and vision for Germany's future. At its core, it promoted an extreme form of nationalism, racial purity, and anti-Semitism. Hitler blamed the Jewish people for Germany's economic problems and social decline, condemned democracy, and called for territorial expansion into Eastern Europe, which he described as quote-unquote living space for the German people. At first, Mein Kampf had modest circulation, but everything changed once Hitler came to power in 1933. The book became a propaganda tool of the Nazi regime, requiring reading for soldiers, students, and even newlyweds. Millions of copies were distributed, and by the end of World War II, it had become one of Germany's top circulating books. Its popularity wasn't due to literary merit, but because it reflected and reinforced the Nazi worldview. It prepared a generation of Germans to accept or participate in some of the darkest events in modern history. After World War II, Mein Kampf was widely recognized as a symbol of hate and genocide. As a result, many countries moved to quickly ban it. In Germany, publishing or selling the book was made illegal for decades. Other countries such as Austria, France, or Russia either banned it outright or imposed heavy restrictions. The concern wasn't just about what the book said, it was more of a concern of what it could inspire. With the rise of hate groups and neo-Nazi movements, governments feared it could fuel a resurgence of extremist ideologies. Even today, in many countries, Mein Kampf remains restricted to only academic settings, and selling it or promoting it publicly remains heavily illegal in many parts of Europe. But despite many efforts to keep it out of public hands, Mein Kampf never fully disappeared, especially in the digital era. Hate groups have circulated copies online, using it to spread neo-Nazi beliefs. In 2016, Germany allowed a special annotated version to be published for the first time in 70 years. This edition included thousands of footnotes explaining and debunking Hitler's claims, with the goal of using the book as an educational tool rather than a propaganda weapon. So, should it be banned? Some say that it's too dangerous to misuse. Others think that dissecting the book's ideas is the best way to fight it. That's me for sure. In most democratic countries, it's very unlikely that it's gonna be fully unbanned without the proper context or controls. But for scholars and historians, access can be crucial in understanding how hate can become policy. Mein Kampf isn't just a book, it's a warning. Studying it isn't about agreeing with its author. It's about recognizing how deadly ideas can grow when left unchallenged. George Orwell published 1884 in 1949, just a few years after the end of World War II, having witnessed the rise of totalitarian regimes of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Orwell was deeply concerned about the dangers of unchecked political power. The novel imagines a grim future where a totalitarian state, led by a figure known only as Big Brother, controls every part of people's lives, from what they say to what they believe, even to what they think. Citizens are constantly watched by telescreens, and independent thought is labeled as a crime. It's not just dystopian fiction, it's political warning. From the moment it was published, 1884 struck a nerve. Its terrifying ideas of government censorship and propaganda and surveillance felt really close to home, especially during the Cold War. Phrases like Big Brother and Thought Police and Doublethink entered the public's vocabulary. As global tensions rose and governments expanded their intelligence agencies, Orwell's fictional world began to mirror real-life fears. The book became essential reading for anyone concerned with liberty, truth, and the power of the state. Very ironically, a book about censorship became the target of censorship itself. In the Soviet Union and other authoritarian countries, 1884 was banned because it directly criticized totalitarianism, the very type of regime those governments upheld. Leaders feared it would open people's eyes to the abuses of state power. But it wasn't just the East. In parts of the United States and other Western nations, the book was challenged or removed from schools due to its bleak tone, graphic content, and scenes involving torture and sexuality. Some argued that it was too dark or inappropriate for younger readers. In both cases, East and West, the reason was the same. 1884 made people uncomfortable, and that was Orwell's whole point. Today, 1884 is considered one of the most important books of the 20th century. While it's still banned in a few restrictive countries, most of the world consider this an essential read, especially around topics of freedom and privacy. And should it be banned? Most educators say no. The book doesn't glorify control, it exposes it. It asks the hard questions about power and surveillance, especially now in the age of social media, mass data collection, and political spin. In democratic societies, the odds of it being banned again are very low. But in countries where speech is tightly controlled, well, this book represents a problem. 1984 is more than fiction, it's a mirror, reflecting what can happen when fear replaces freedom, and when truth becomes whatever those in power say it is. Now, before we go to our next example, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this video so far and you want to see more like this in the future. The Apocrypha refers to a group of ancient texts that once formed part of the early Bible. These include books like Tobit, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, among others. Early Christians read them regularly and considered them spiritually valuable. For centuries, they were part of the biblical canon for many believers. Church fathers often quoted them in sermons and theological writings, and their inclusion in the Septuagint, which was the version of the Old Testament most used by early Christians, helps cement their importance. They offered stories of courage, wisdom, and divine intervention, and also bridged a crucial historical gap between the Old and New Testaments. Things changed dramatically during the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. Reformers like Martin Luther challenged the traditional authority of the Catholic Church, and that included questioning the biblical canon. While translating the Bible into German, Luther moved the Apocrypha to a whole different section, calling them useful but not inspired. Others went further, completely omitting them from the Bible entirely. The reasons for this vary. Some believed that the texts were too mysterious, others believed that they supported doctrines that they rejected, and others thought that they were too tied to the Catholic Church. Although the Apocrypha were never officially banned, they were quite sidelined. In many Protestant traditions, they faded from sermons, study groups, and daily reading. Over time, entire generations grew up never encountering them. Recently, there has been a renewed interest from scholars and theologians, not necessarily to reinstate them into Protestant Bibles, but to study them as a vital historical and theological work. These books offer insights into Jewish beliefs, practices, and struggles during the time between the Old and New Testaments, a crucial era that shaped the world Jesus Christ was born into. So, should they be reintegrated in a more canonical way? A lot of people argue that removing them from the scriptures creates a gap in the knowledge. Others remain cautious. But one thing is for sure, the Apocrypha are no longer forgotten, and they're being rediscovered. Whether you see them as hidden gems or missing chapters, the Apocrypha challenges us to rethink what we consider sacred and how much history lies just outside the margins of the familiar Bible. In 1945, near the desert town of Nakhmadi in Egypt, a local farmer made a discovery that would shake the foundations of Christian history. A sealed clay jar buried in the sand. Inside were ancient leather-bound papyrus texts, over 50 of them, written nearly 1800 years earlier. These writings, now called the Gnostic Gospels, offered a radically different version of early Christianity. The most well-known among them include the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the Gospel of Judas. But these texts were not new. They were written during the same time as the New Testament Gospels, but they were lost to time, hidden away after being deemed heretical by the early church. These texts didn't just offer new stories, they challenged what many thought they knew about Jesus, the apostles, and the origins of Christianity. In these writings, salvation isn't about sin or sacrifice, it's about gnosis, or inner knowledge. Jesus appears more as a mystical teacher than a suffering savior. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, a woman takes a leading role among the disciples. In the Gospel of Judas, the most infamous traitor in Christian history, he is portrayed as a trusted confidant, helping Jesus fulfill a divine plan. These reinterpretations gave voice to early Christian communities who saw faith very differently and were ultimately silenced. By the 4th century AD, the Christian church was consolidating its power. At major gatherings like the Council of Nicaea, church leaders defined orthodoxy, the correct version of Christian belief, and anything outside that was labeled as heresy. The Gnostic texts were among those deemed dangerous, because they challenged the authority of the church and elevated personal spiritual experience, all threats to the emergent church structure. These books were banned, burned, and believers persecuted. Some followers, fearing for their lives, hid their writings underground, where they remained for over 1,500 years. Today, the Gnostic Gospels are no longer banned, but they're controversial. Some Christians dismiss them entirely as false teachings. So, should they be fully embraced or restored to the canon? That's unlikely, but scholars argue that they deserve to be read, studied, and understood, not to replace the Bible, but to offer a broader picture of how early Christians wrestle with big questions. Who is Jesus? What does it mean to be saved? And who gets to decide what's true? The Gnostic Gospel reminds us that Christianity was never a single voice. It was a chorus of competing visions, some of which were silenced. But thanks to one accidental discovery in the Egyptian desert, those voices are speaking again. The Book of Enoch is one of the most mysterious ancient texts ever discovered. Likely written between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC, it reads like ancient science fiction. The central storyline involves a group of angels called the Watchers who descend to Earth, break divine laws, and marry human women. From these forbidden unions came the Nephilim, giant hybrid beings who wreak havoc on the world. Their violence leads to a cosmic judgment that reshapes both heaven and earth. But the book doesn't stop there. It goes to describe the architecture of heaven, the movement of the stars, and even the throne of God. It explained the origins of demons and even the fate of the fallen angels. The imagery is rich, symbolic, and deeply unsettling. Between 200 BC and 100 AD, the Book of Enoch was incredibly influential. Many ancient Jewish traditions treated it as an authoritative scripture. But by the 4th century AD, things changed. As the early Christian church began deciding which text should become official scripture, the Book of Enoch was left out. But why? Well, the stories were simply too strange. Angels mating with humans, giants roaming the earth, it challenged that cleaner narrative that the church was trying to promote. Worse, it blurred the line between divine and monstrous. So Enoch wasn't just excluded, it was actively suppressed, banned in many regions, and eventually lost to most of the Christian world. The Book of Enoch never really disappeared though. While Europe forgot about it, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved it for nearly 2,000 years, and it remained part of their biblical canon. Western scholars didn't rediscover the full text until the 18th century, when a Scottish explorer brought it back from Ethiopia. Should it be banned? Well, that depends on who you ask. For scholars and spiritual seekers, it's a goldmine. It's a window into the ancient imagination and a lost chapter of early theology. But for those who prefer a tidy canon, its chaotic vision of angels, monsters, and judgment is still deeply unsettling. So, such ideas must be eradicated, along with those who spread them. As for whether it will be fully accepted again, well, that's unlikely. But the fact that it survived at all means something. It leaves us with a haunting question. If this much was hidden, how much more has been lost? About 2,000 years ago, A Roman poet by the name Lucretius wrote a groundbreaking poem called On the Nature of Things. Unlike typical poetry, this was a philosophical work written in beautiful verse, explaining how everything in the universe, including people, stars, and even the soul, is made up of tiny, invisible particles called atoms. Lucretius argued that the soul dies with the body, and if the gods, if they exist, are indifferent to human affairs. This idea was very bold at the time. Though influential in some intellectual circles during the Roman period, On the Nature of Things largely faded into obscurity after the fall of Rome. Its ideas about atoms and natural laws were far ahead of its time, but overshadowed by religious doctrine. The poem regained attention much later during the early 1400s when the Renaissance was starting. A scholar named Poggio Braccioli discovered a forgotten manuscript in a German monastery, sparking renewed interest. The early Christian church viewed Lucretius' work as a direct challenge to its teachings, especially because it denied the soul's immortality. As a result, the poem was ignored, suppressed, and sometimes actively destroyed for over 1,000 years. It was essentially banned by omission, as it was not copied or circulated in medieval Europe due to its controversial ideas. This book is fortunately no longer banned. It's celebrated and appreciated worldwide. It helped put an end to the end of superstition and opened the door to the age of reason. Lucretius' ancient poem reminds us that progress often begins with ideas once considered dangerous, and that questioning tradition can lead to revolutionary discoveries. The Sibylline books were ancient scrolls filled with powerful prophecies. According to tradition, they were purchased by the Roman king Tarquinius Superbus in the 6th century BC from a mysterious prophetess called Sibyl. These texts contain predictions about Rome's future, including warnings of wars, famines, and other tragedies that would befall the empire. Because of their supposed divine origin, the books were considered sacred and were stored securely in temples within Rome. For many centuries, the Sibylline books held enormous influence over Roman politics. Roman leaders, including senators and emperors, consulted the books during times of crisis. But despite their importance, the Sibylline books did not survive the passage of time intact. Over the years, some rulers feared the truths of the prophecies revealed, especially if those truths threatened their power. They sometimes hid, altered, or destroyed parts of the text to control the narrative and keep dangerous knowledge from the public. The final known fate of the Sibylline books was in 405 AD, when they were destroyed in a fire. It remains unclear whether this was accidental or deliberate, but the loss marked a disappearance of a major part of Rome's prophetic heritage. Today, only small fragments and references to the original books exist, and that's what scholars basically use to base their understanding of them. So, while the original scrolls are lost forever, their legacy endures in the idea that ancient civilizations sought guidance through prophecy during times of turmoil. The story of the Sibylline books is a haunting reminder of how history can be shaped by what is preserved and what is lost. Hipatia of Alexandria lived during the late 4th and 5th centuries AD. She was a renowned mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher, teaching at the famed Library of Alexandria. Hipatia embodied the classical tradition of science and philosophy, emphasizing logic, inquiry, and the pursuit of truth. And her influence stretched far beyond Alexandria. Students traveled from across the Mediterranean to study with her, seeking to understand the mysteries of the cosmos and philosophy. She was a beacon of rational thought during a time when different religious and cultural forces were clashing. Unfortunately, her prominence made her a target during rising tensions between Christians and pagans. In 415 AD, amidst a violent conflict in Alexandria, a Christian mob brutally murdered her. Her death was a tragic turning point. It marked not only the loss of her brilliant mind, but also the beginning of the end of the ancient tradition that she represented. Following her death, many of her writings and other classical works were unfortunately destroyed. This was not just censorship of the thinker's ideas. It was an attempt to completely erase her legacy from the world. Today, Hipatia stands as a symbol of intellectual freedom and the ongoing quest for truth, reminding us why questioning and learning are essential to advancing as a society. So, what do you think of these books? Are there any that you would definitely ban, or do you think that all of them should be protected at all costs? Let me know in the comments below. and thank you very much for joining me for today's tale. If you had fun with the video, learned anything new, please go ahead and drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone else. That's a very small button for you and a gigantic leap for my channel. Until the next tale, farewell, and may the gods smile upon you.